Hey everybody, and welcome to the 5 Bytes podcast. I'm your host, Rory Monahan. Coming up on this week's episode, Patch Tuesday news roundup, including many issues related to the recent updates has been reported. Also, Opera requests regulators to scrutinize Microsoft over Microsoft Edge. And a company is set to lay off 1,800 employees whilst also attempting to hire 1,800 employees in different roles to leverage AI for its business operations. For this and more, keep listening to this episode of the podcast, which of course, as always, is brought to you by my sponsors. And that includes ControlUp, end-to-end digital experience management for the work from anywhere era. ControlUp, happy users, happy IT. And also brought to you by Network's Policy Pack, where you use Group Policy, Policy Pack Cloud, or MDM, to remove local admin rights, manage lockdown applications, Java, browsers, and mitigate ransomware, plus more. And also brought to you by Numescent, the inventors of the first and only cloud-native container management platform for Windows desktops. And of course, also brought to you by Master Packager, who make an application packaging software that helps you build packages that end users love, enterprises want, and the Windows OS needs. If you enjoyed the show each week, you have these awesome sponsors to thank. And now for some news. As I said on last week's episode of the podcast, I'm a little late to the game when it comes to the Patch Tuesday news for this month. Unfortunately, I had to travel last week. That was in conflict with the actual Patch Tuesday. But the good news is I can cover a roundup of the significant Windows updates for this month. And because I'm a little delayed, there has been reports of several potential issues related to these Windows updates that I can share in this episode. So let's hit the ground running here. So there was 142 flaws patched this month, including 4 zero-day vulnerabilities. A roundup of the vulnerabilities patched includes 26 elevation of privilege vulnerabilities, 24 security feature bypass vulnerabilities, 59 remote code execution vulnerabilities, 9 information disclosure vulnerabilities, 17 denial of service vulnerabilities, and 7 spoofing vulnerabilities. Of those 0 days, that includes CVE-2024-38080, which is a Windows Hyper-V elevation of privilege vulnerability. This essentially could give attackers system privileges if they exploit it successfully. While Microsoft stated that the flaw is actively exploited, it has not shared any further details about the vulnerability, including who actually discovered it. Another of the 0 days is CVE-2024-38112, and this is a Windows MS HTML platform spoofing vulnerability. Successful exploitation of this vulnerability requires an attacker to take additional actions prior to exploitation to prepare the target environment. An attacker would have to send the victim a malicious file that the victim would have to execute, which, it's MS-HTML, so it's likely an MS-HTML file that they would have to launch, which is not outside the realms of possibility because it's common enough that users would launch those types of files. Significantly, it has been reported that this has actually been actively exploited in attacks for 18 months by attackers launching malicious scripts while bypassing the built-in security features. So that is a significant one that seems to have been plaguing enterprise environments for quite some time now. Also listed was CVE-2024-35264, and this is a .NET and Visual Studio remote code execution vulnerability. With this, an attacker could exploit by closing an HTTP3 stream while the request body is being processed, leading to a race condition. This could then result in remote code execution. Microsoft has not shared where it was publicly disclosed and said it was internally discovered by Radek Zikmund of Microsoft. Finally, in this roundup, CVE-2024-37985, which is a systematic identification and characterization of proprietary prefetchers vulnerability in ARM. Microsoft has fixed this vulnerability that could be used in side channel attacks that can be used to steal secret information. An attacker who successfully exploited this vulnerability could view heap memory from a privileged process running on a server. Successful exploitation of the vulnerability required an attacker to take additional actions prior to exploitation to prepare the target environment. So while still obviously a very significant vulnerability, when further action is required, it tends to make exploitation or mass exploitation a little more difficult. But I did promise some of the fallout for this month, which, to be fair to Microsoft, there has been less fallout from the Windows updates in the last couple of months, but there's also been lower than average patches, at least off the top of my head. I believe there's been lower than average. Like I see the number of remote code execution vulnerabilities popping back up this month, and the total number of vulnerabilities at 142 seems higher than the last couple of months. So with more vulnerabilities patched, it seems the more likely that there's going to be breakages caused by these updates, and that certainly seems to be the case this month. First up, with the issues reported, the TS gateway service has been reported to be crashing on remote desktop gateway systems every 30 minutes, and this is potentially affecting Server 2016 through to Server 2022. Also on the server side, some SAP customers reported an issue with a recent server update 2. In this case, the result is killing the LPD service when attempting to print. So if you're an SAP customer and printing is failing, it could be related to the recent Windows updates. Separately, Harvey Wiggins reports another issue, this one related to KB5040442 specifically, which causes peculiar boot delay problems when National Instruments DAQMX drivers are installed, whether on 22H2 or 23H2 of the OS. It appears with those issues, if you remove the recent Windows updates, it seems to alleviate the problem. However, this next one, it does not seem to be the same case. So after installing the June 2024 Windows Preview update, some have faced issues using the Windows Update Agent API in PowerShell scripts or VB scripts while searching for Windows updates. Due to the issue, you may get an empty result when querying the properties of iUpdate objects to present in the iUpdate collection and get error codes with 0x8002802B when calling methods on the object from your script. So if you're trying to query information related to Windows updates for your own custom scripting and it's failing, see if you've got this preview update. Now, luckily, this is a preview, so hopefully organizations don't have this one widely deployed. And you can't just uninstall the patch, it seems, but there has been a known issue rollback made available by Microsoft for this. There's also been another issue with the recent Windows updates reported, this one specifically with KB5040427. And this is a blue screen of devices if you have signed WDAC policies on them. So it seemed many of these issues had been confirmed by other people who were facing them as well. While I would tell you to not delay deploying your Windows updates, certainly scrutinize during the initial rollouts to make sure that there's no issues that are impacting your organization. Over the last month, Microsoft 365 and Microsoft Office users have been experiencing a 30088-27 error when attempting to update the application. Based on widespread user reports, the update problems plague Microsoft 365 users and those who use the click-to-run versions of Office 2016, 2019, and 2021. The error reads, quote, "Something went wrong. We're sorry we ran into a problem while looking for updates. Please check your network connection and try again later," end quote. A Microsoft community moderator advised those impacted to revert the previous version and turn off automatic updates until the next Office release. Bleepingcomputer.com has reported that disabling updates and rolling back to the previous version fixes the issue. So if you are running one of those click-to-run Office versions and you're facing this error, no, you're not the only one. Thanks to Dan Goff and Richard Knight for highlighting this next one to me on Twitter. Flexera published a vulnerability CVE-2024-3310, which is a privilege escalation vulnerability during MSI repair. They say the vulnerability has been reported in the basic MSI and install script MSI setups if configured with certain options, and that includes a project that has folder and registry permissions configured using locked down permissions options, and set to custom install shield handling. Also, if the self-register option is configured with install shield self-registration table or IS self-reg. All supported versions are affected by this issue. The known issue with Windows Installer Repair allows a standard user to run MSI repair operations in NT authority/system context without requiring administrator credentials. This exploitable nature of MSI repair can present a potential security risk if the file operations from the deferred custom actions are not properly protected from standard user access. If custom handling option is configured, Install Shield extracts an executable named isbew64.exe to a writable temp folder, which is used to perform additional tasks like setting file and registry permissions and self-registration of COM servers. This misconfiguration of extracting an executable file to a writable folder along with the MSI repair exploitable behavior could potentially lead to a local privilege escalation by replacing isbew64.exe with the malicious one. So this is actually very similar to how cyber gangs have leveraged self-updating mechanisms and auto-updates within applications where the vendor simply renames an executable and launches the newer executable lays down, or even just in-place updates using a specific file name. Or at least that's the way I interpret this. Some workarounds have been provided by Flexera that includes setting the lockdown permission option to traditional Windows installer handling, or choose Windows installer self-registration table option, or self-reg. Now, in particular, those lockdown permissions and the custom install shield handling, if you're using those, there's likely a reason why you're using them. So before using any of those workarounds, it's probably a good idea to look at your packages and figure out why you're using these. Probably better than changing how your packages are configured to be using a hotfix that has been made available from Flexera for Install Shield 2023 R2. If you're not on that version, you may need to upgrade and then install the hotfix. Our old friend the US CISA is warning Citrix customers to patch recently disclosed vulnerabilities, the most pressing of which is listed as CVE-2024-6235. It is found in the Citrix NetScaler console, which is a cloud-based management tool for NetScaler appliances. Exploiting this flaw could grant attackers unauthorized access to sensitive data, posing a significant security risk, according to the cyberexpress.com. This high-severity vulnerability scores a 9.4 out of 10 on the severity scale. It originates from improper authentication controls within the console, potentially allowing attackers with access to the console's IP address to bypass security measures and steal sensitive information. NetScaler console versions 14.1 before 14.1-25.53 are affected. Additionally, there is a high-severity denial of service flaw in the NetScaler console too, and that one is tracked as CVE-2024-6236. This denial of service vulnerability also affects the NetScaler agent and NetScaler service virtual machine. Attackers with access to the IPs of those components can also potentially launch denial of service attacks. Citrix has also addressed another high-severity denial of service vulnerability listed as CVE-2024-5491 that impacts NetScaler ADC and gateway appliances. Furthermore, just last week, another vulnerability from Citrix was disclosed, CVE-2024-6286, and this one exists in the Citrix Workspace app for Windows. This flaw could allow low-privileged attackers with local access to escalate their privileges to system. This vulnerability affects Citrix Workspace app versions before 2403.1 if you're using the current release, or before version 2402 if you're using the long-term service release. And those bunch of Citrix vulnerabilities that I just mentioned were actually published the last week. But as I mentioned, I got the episode out early last week because I was traveling for work. Well, just yesterday, so at the time of recording this is Tuesday the 16th of July. Well, just yesterday, on Monday the 15th of July, Citrix disclosed 2 more vulnerabilities in the NetScaler ADC and NetScaler Gateway. Those are listed as CVE-2024-5491 and CVE-2024-5492. One of these vulnerabilities is another denial of service vulnerability, and the other one is an open redirect vulnerability that allows a remote unauthenticated attacker to redirect users to arbitrary websites. To me, the latter vulnerability that allows a remote unauthenticated attacker to redirect users to an arbitrary website sounds the more daunting of the two, but it appears to have only got a severity score of 5.1 out of 10. So there may be some other factors or requirements in order to successfully exploit this. There isn't a whole lot of information around these last 2 vulnerabilities in the Citrix support article that I'm referencing for this episode, but maybe more information will be provided at a later date. Regardless, check out the security advisories for all these vulnerabilities for yourself. And since a lot of these are related to the actual Citrix NetScalers, now these should be high priority to get patched as soon as possible. Microsoft recently shared a temporary fix for those facing issues with the Photos app on Windows 11. This is an issue that I recently talked about on a previous episode of the podcast. The fix, or the temporary fix that has been published, requires downloading the WinApp SDK and installing a Windows App Runtime install-x64.exe. But Microsoft have said they also plan to release a permanent fix soon. Given the fact that Windows 11 does not have widespread adoption in the enterprise yet, this is likely not going to be something that you encounter. However, if you do use it for some of your home PCs, or you have remote workers who use their own PCs, perhaps they'll run into it. But, regardless, there's other photo viewers out there other than the built-in Photos app, so it's probably not a huge issue. Microsoft have announced some new features for CoPilot for Microsoft 365, including a change in behavior within Excel. Previously, when a user asked CoPilot to make changes to their table data, CoPilot would make the changes directly. Now, CoPilot will respond with the description of the planned changes along with a button to apply. Users can choose to refine before applying. This provides more user awareness and control over CoPilot's changes, according to a report by neowin.net. Also, users in the new Outlook will now be able to use the Alt key to bring up key tips when using keyboard navigation. This behavior was previously reliant on Win plus Alt. Something I missed in previous episodes that was actually news like 2 weeks ago. But hey, I only saw it this week, so it was news to me. Maybe it will be to you. But Microsoft has announced they will deprecate WSUS driver synchronization on April 18, 2025. For on-premises contexts, drivers will be available on the Microsoft Update catalog, but you will no longer be able to import them into WSUS. You'll need to use other means, such as device driver packages, to distribute the drivers within your network. Microsoft says they have made this move after reviewing the results of a survey. Out of the participants of the survey who used WSUS, only 34% reported that they use it to synchronize drivers. Most of the 34% reported that they are in the process of implementing a different solution and don't anticipate any problems with deprecation. Only 8% of the participants indicated concerns over potential effects from deprecation. So, it really, if you're in the 8%, you might want to pay attention to this. But also, 34% is my takeaway figure. If you're in that 34%, it's time to start looking at device driver packages. Ars Technica has reported that Google is now allowing people to use 2 passkeys, or 1 passkey and 1 physical token, in their advanced protection program. And this is just a minimum requirement. Those who want further security can enroll using as many keys as they want. Google had previously required people to have 2 physical security keys to enroll in APP, and this is just a further example now of one of the major tech companies embracing the use of passkeys. We've seen Microsoft moving to embrace passkeys in several of its product line, and now Google is moving to further embrace it within their customer base too. Speaking of Google, reported this week was that Google are in negotiations to purchase the cybersecurity company Wiz for $23 billion. As of scripting this episode, neither Google nor Wiz have commented on the Wall Street Journal's report about the potential acquisition. Wiz specializes in protecting cloud systems, and since its launch, it has detected security flaws from many companies, including from Microsoft. And for what it's worth, I scripted this episode of the podcast on the Sunday. I'm recording it on the Tuesday. As of when I'm recording this also, it looks like it hasn't been complete, but several other major mainstream outlets have picked up on the story. So it seems like one that's going to be imminently confirmed or closed. In reports of potential acquisitions, it has been reported by Ars Technica that AMD is set to buy a Finnish AI startup called Silo AI for $665 million in one of the largest such takeovers in Europe. Silo AI offers tailored AI models and platforms to enterprise customers. The Finnish company launched an initiative last year to build large language models in European languages, including Swedish, Icelandic, and Danish. Ars Technica reports that AMD will use Silo AI to build custom large language models and enhance their offering in the AI space. Ars Technica suggests this is just one move in AMD's efforts to gain ground on Nvidia. If you listen to the podcast regularly, you'll have heard me cover the fact that Nvidia's stock price has soared in recent years, and their value brought them briefly ahead of Apple as the world's second most valuable company. Although I think that order of the top three is completely shifted once again. Speaking of Nvidia, they recently revealed that the Sphere in Las Vegas is powered using their GPUs. Specifically, 150 Nvidia RTX A6000 GPUs. Since there are over 150 of these GPUs, the total cost of them at market retail price is just over $1 million US. According to Nvidia, the RTX A6000 GPUs are mounted to workstations which stream the video content created by Sphere Studios. The high-power graphics cards can then deliver the content in 3 layers of 16K resolution at 60 frames per second. In addition, the Sphere leverages Nvidia's A40 GPUs in order to power Sphere Studios' image processing software that they use. And if you haven't been to Las Vegas since the Sphere has opened, I'm not going to say you should go to Vegas because it's not my favorite place in the world, and it's certainly not a city that's for everyone, but it is really impressive to see. So if you do get an opportunity, you should check out the Sphere. WindowsCentral.com has reported that Opera is reportedly not pleased with the European Commission's decision to agree with Microsoft that Bing and Edge do not meet the threshold for Microsoft to be considered a gatekeeper in the browser and search space, taking particular exception with Microsoft Edge's positioning. Opera has requested the EU General Court to annul the European Commission's decision to not designate Microsoft Edge as a gatekeeper under the recent Digital Markets Act. In their plea, they said, quote, "The designation of Edge as a gatekeeper is needed to level the playing field for browsers on PCs in the same way as has been done with smartphones. We believe that the decision in particular fails to properly assess Edge's durable and privileged position on Windows devices, which creates an uneven playing field for its competitors. Edge, like Internet Explorer before it, is the gatekeeper through which users on Windows must pass to download another browser. This is precisely the type of gatekeeper role which the DMA was intended to address." End quote. While I can definitely see their point, at least in terms of the enterprise, but even consumer-based, considering how many consumers actually use Windows operating systems, you could probably make this argument for any Microsoft product. Microsoft, by its own design and just by nature through attrition, has an incredible advantage over the competition in pretty much every space of computing, so it's a tough one to attack. You can certainly see why regulators would be getting concerned around Microsoft's involvement with OpenAI as a means for them to kind of gain a leg up with the direction that people are going to be going for search purposes in future. But the browser, I guess, I understand their point, and this goes back to the whole browser choice thing that was forced previously. Maybe something like that is just still required. because I don't really know that Edge is becoming the dominant browser, at least not yet. Speaking of Microsoft and their position, Microsoft has withdrawn from its non-voting observer role on OpenAI's board, while Apple has opted not to take a similar position on the board after what is believed to be pressure by both US and European regulators. In June, the FTC began looking into investments made by big tech companies such as Microsoft, Amazon, and Google in generative AI startups. Meanwhile, the European Commission also announced that it was exploring the possibility of an antitrust investigation into the Microsoft OpenAI partnership after deciding not to proceed with the probe under merger control rules. So it seems like maybe some warning shots were fired that way, which has made Microsoft move in this direction. But that's not something that Microsoft has stated themselves. It's just merely speculation based off of this move. And if you follow the podcast regularly, you'll have noticed this trend, but it does seem like the US and European regulators seem to be working in closer alignment than ever before. So it'll be interesting to see what effect that has going forward. On Wednesday, Intuit CEO Sasan Goodarzi announced in a letter to the company that it would be laying off 1,800 employees, which is about 10% of its workforce, while simultaneously planning to hire the same number of new workers as part of a major restructuring effort purportedly focused on AI. With new hires, the company expects its overall headcount to grow in its 2025 fiscal year. The company plans to hire new talent in engineering, product development, data science, and customer-facing roles, with a particular emphasis on AI expertise. Ars Technica suggests the reorganization may also serve as an opportunity for Intuit to trim its workforce of underperforming staff, using the AI hype cycle as a compelling backdrop for a broader house-cleaning effort. And I saw some comments chastising the company as basically being cowardly if they're trying to use this as a way to get rid of underperforming staff and making it a kind of positive news story, which I can kind of see that point, to be honest. Of course, companies will announce these types of positions too and say, oh yeah, like we're hiring 2,000 people in these roles, but that never actually comes to fruition. So they can kind of negate some of the negative press by saying they're going to create the same number of jobs, but then, never actually deliver all those jobs. So, feel free to scrutinize and follow that actual headcount to see if it's true. Ars Technica recently reported that a web advertising company has recreated some defunct classic tech blogs like the unofficial Apple Weblog, or TUAW, and iLounge by mimicking the bylines of the website's former writers and publishing AI-generated content under their names. One of the writers who was subject of the deception is the awesome Christina Warren, as fake content allegedly written by her and other past staff has been published on an Imposter site using the original domain from their site. Some of the content simply reworded articles that originally appeared on the domain, while other articles tied real writers' names to new AI-generated articles about current events. Warren emailed the company threatening legal action, and after she did that, the byline was changed to say Mary Brown instead of Christina Warren. The same goes for many of the other authors' names that were featured on the site. So obviously this is pretty despicable, and it must be infuriating for those authors. Unfortunately, another bad example of the effects of AI. Bloomberg has shared a list of OpenAI's 5 stages of artificial intelligence, which was expected to be shared with investors of the company. And it's an interesting read to see what they define as the stages of AI. It includes level 1, which is chatbots, AI with conversational language. Level 2, reasoners, which is human-level problem solving. Level 3, agents, systems that can take actions. Level 4, innovators, AI that can aid in invention. And level 5, organizations, AI that can do the work of an organization. So it's interesting to see at these different levels because there has been previous attempts of kind of categorizing the levels and types of AI, such as like narrow or weak AI up to super AI. And it essentially kind of covers what those previous definitions included, like organizations being the last level. That would be previously that super AI. that could surpass human intelligence, do operations independently, and achieve a higher rate of success basically than a human. So, it being organizations that AI could do the work of an entire organization kind of aligns with that too. There's not a whole lot of context provided with this report by Ars Technica that shares this list, but presumably it's going to maybe be made public if it's going to be presented to investors. So let's keep an eye out to see if that actually comes into the public eye. In one of those fun stories, German ships used in anti-submarine warfare and air defense are undergoing modernization, with Ars Technica reporting that currently these critical systems still rely on 8-inch floppy disks. The ships were commissioned from October 1994 to December 1996. The government plans to develop and integrate an onboard emulation system to replace the floppy disks. The replacement of the floppy disks is expected to start on October 1st and end July 31st, 2025. So to me, the way I read that, the fact that they're trying to come up with an onboard emulation system means they're likely not really going to refactor the software or redevelop it. They're still going to rely on it, but just find a way to do away with the need for the actual physical floppy disk. And this is just another example of dated tech like floppy disks still being required by some very sensitive and important infrastructure and organizations. We've seen those jetways at airports still relying on floppy disks or CDs in some of the older airplanes too. So chalk this up to another use of floppy disks in 2024. Finally, in the news for this week, I would just like to say congratulations to all new and renewed Microsoft MVPs. Thank you for all of your valuable community contributions. And please keep contributing because you give me content to feature on the podcast. I'm just kidding. Enjoy the award. Congratulations to everyone. You deserve it. And now this episode's scripts, tricks, and tips. First up this week, Dane Stuckey published a blog post on endpoint isolation with the Windows Firewall, which contains best practices and strategies for managing the Windows Firewall, which sometimes goes kind of understated and forgotten by IT. So it's well worth a read, this one. Also this week, I saw that Helge Klein shared a blog post of his on LinkedIn. This one was on how to set up Filebrowser in a Docker container as a web interface for browser-based access to a Samba file server. So maybe one that's kind of specific there, but it's an interesting use case for a Docker container, and it might be one that interests you. Next up, Bruno Gabrielli shared a blog post on Azure Monitor, how to stop log-based alerts for specific resources. So this was a pretty good one to have because some of those alerts can be quite chatty and you may have to go through and refine a lot of those alerts. And this is good information on how to tackle some of those chatty alerts. The awesome Sean Bass recently pointed to the handling of Ticketmaster's response to their major breach of an example of what not to do when your organization gets breached. And I think that's really, really good advice. It's something that I've talked about related to other breach stories where organizations are at least very forthcoming with information. It seems like Ticketmaster, their parent company, really mishandled their breach, and it's leaving them with a bit of a black eye. Finally, I'll end with a bit of a dumb one. But last week, like I said on last week's episode and this week's episode, I had to travel for work, and I brought a Dell laptop over with me around 11 p.m. the night before I had to go present at a customer site and also at a partner event. I was just practicing some of my slides, and when I went to shut down my machine, the only option was shut down and install Windows updates or restart and install the Windows updates. So I restarted just to make sure that the machine seemed okay after installing the updates. I mean, ideally, I would have liked to just not accept the updates, but at that point it seemed like they were already installed, and it was just a case of completing the install when I shut down or when I rebooted. Unfortunately, one of the updates, because it's just like a consumer non-managed device that I was using, was actually a firmware upgrade from Dell. And I did let it reboot because I wanted to make sure that there were no obvious signs of a problem, that it booted up okay, that I was able to browse out on the internet and that kind of stuff, and my main applications, particularly PowerPoint, were working okay. And it was. Unfortunately for me, it seemed after the firmware upgrade on the laptop, it borked some of my device drivers, including the video graphics drivers. So when I went to connect the device to a display the next morning, it didn't work. And unfortunately, where I was presenting it that morning, I wasn't allowed guest Wi-Fi access, so I couldn't just search for the updated driver to install it. So, boo. My lesson learned, and it may be one that you want to use as well. If you're traveling and you need to present around the time of Patch Tuesday, could be a good idea to disable the Windows Update on your device. It's a horrible practice to disable Windows Updates. Of course, you should install Windows Updates as soon as you can. However, speaking as someone who got screwed over by it, maybe it's safer in some instances to disable it and just install them at a better time. I really wish there was a defer option available to me. It was unfortunate that I went ahead and installed those in the background and didn't give me that option. I understand why I did. It was 11 o'clock at night. It was outside of my active hours, but still extremely frustrating. But anyway, this was a much longer than usual episode because I had been traveling and it's been a while since the last one. I apologize. Hopefully we get back into the regular cadence next week and the episodes become shorter again. Thanks for listening.